I think the question I'm most asked by people who see my work are things like, why the moose? And why the Canadian icons? If I was chosen to play a lost boy in a film about a boy who gets lost at the fair, it's called Johnny at the Fair. It is on YouTube. It is very funny. In the movie, I run around the fair and get lost, but in the middle of it all, I get kissed by Barbara Ann Scott. I shake hands with Prime Minister Mackenzie King and pet a moose. So I was an impressionable young kid, and what I didn't realize is how much that childhood experience became something of an imprinting for my entire career as an adult. Got a job teaching at the University of Calgary and drove alone across Canada in my 20s in a little mini minor. And I was so overwhelmed by the vastness of the country and the emptiness. It was in Calgary where I really started to think about Canada. And then after I finished 2 years of teaching, I came home, and what did I look at in my own hometown? The Toronto streetcar. That was in the 70s. And a good art critic could compare it with Warhol's soup cans, but the old red rocket of Toronto. So I did a whole series on the streetcars, and it was a very successful show at the Isaacs Gallery in 1972 in Toronto. By chance, I had read somewhere in a newspaper that Queen Elizabeth was coming to the Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, to dedicate the new theatre designed by Ron Tom. And somewhere, somehow, this is long before the computer era, I had an epiphany, and I kept wondering about the Queen being the monarch. And in school, the moose was called the Monarch of the North. So I started playing around with these puns, visual puns, verbal puns, and imagery. And lo and behold, I put her on a moose. And again, this was before Photoshop. I had to juxtapose these various newspaper clippings of the moose. And now, because of the preponderance of the media and the invasion of privacy, there are a dysfunctional human family like anybody else, but then they were revered. Because the dealer refused to show this stuff, and because I lived on a street called Shaw Street in the heart of Little Italy in Toronto, I decided to open the show myself in my own home, and I renovated this dump, and I called the show the Other Shaw Festival. And I opened the very same day Queen Elizabeth was in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Margaret Atwood poured tea on the lawn. Other artists like Joyce Wieland and Greg Curnow were there. So Queen on Moose became irrevocably associated with me as a pop artist. Life is full of serendipitous meetings, chance meetings, and I was lucky enough to meet Margaret Atwood when we were both summer camp counselors in the 60s. And she first started sending me her poems when I went off to graduate school in the US at the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, and she was out in Vancouver. She became my muse and my mentor. I mean, no one could have been more grateful than I at that time that someone of her talent focused on me and my work. And she kept sending me her poems because she knew or believed that I could amplify them and do stuff with them. It made me very, very inspired each time she'd send me another poem. Well, the first 4 books were the rehearsal for the major one. When she sent me the manuscript to the Journals of Susanna Moodie, which she had written while she was, a lot of it when she was in Boston, I was working at Expo 67 in Montreal, it took my breath away. I knew it was a masterpiece the minute I read it. And all I wanted to do was pay it homage. I wanted to make sure I could give the poems, enhance them the way they should be, not mere illustration, but to amplify the sense of the poems. Took me, I think it was at least 2 years to put together these collages made from lithographs and silk screens and what have you. The original Roughing It in the Bush was rather florid 19th century prose, and each chapter Atwood précede into one poem. I was able to hire 2 master printers from Spain who came over, and for 9 months we printed the Journals of Susanna Moodie. It was my baby. 13,000 separate handmade impressions. The book came out in October of 1980 at $6,000 a copy, but it has become our signature marriage of words and images. We were in our prime. Her talent was exploding then, the brilliance of her simple, accessible, poetic mind. An example, after we had crossed the long illness that was the ocean, we sailed upriver. On the first island, the immigrants threw off their clothes and danced like sandflies. We left behind, one by one, the cities rotting with cholera, one by one, our civilized distinctions, and entered a large darkness. I had a whole series of paintings called Obscure Canadian Historical Events because I was trying to explore the psyche of the nation and figure out why are we the way we are. Where did it come from? Where did our attitudes come from? And once again, I focused on the Loyalists and the American Revolution and the fork in the road in North America where two individual nations emerged. They were intrepid. I mean, John Graves Simcoe had fought against George Washington, became a member of Parliament in England, and lobbied to become the first Lieutenant Governor of the newly created province of Upper Canada, and thus became the birth of the county and this whole area where we are in your beautiful gallery right now. But it is a fascinating period, and it interested me as a 21st century artist, is how do these people manage? We're the envy of the world in so many ways, but in fact, the country is somewhat provincial. It hasn't learned how to do value-added mystique with the work of many living artists the way it does in other countries. It helps to be dead, it helps to do decorative landscape. Of course, our group of seven are our one major value-added mystical group. There are people who care passionately about what living artists are doing, and if you have a message or you're trying to create some kind of iconography based on the lives we live as Canadians, I'm very proud to know that there are people out